Lucia Calso, voice teacher here with the 8th video. We start putting the ingredients together. I made a video on the larynx, the structure, the cartilage and the little bone, hyoid bone, with the skeletal muscles that we use for phonation, and it is part of the respiratory system. Another video on the respiratory system in a wider way, lungs and air, the digestive system as a general one, the pharynx as a part of the digestive system, and if you sing you know that the pharynx must have some characteristics to sing, otherwise we cannot sing. The skeletal muscle system that I don't call the musculoskeletal system because it has some ideas about, and it has a taste, a little biased for us, for the reasoning I make, and I made especially the point of the structure seen in the perspective of the joint by joint model. The cranial nerves being the specific nerves for the head, the neck, so the larynx and the pharynx, and the vagus nerve that goes deep into the system till the colon, into the digestive organs, and the thoracolumbar organs as afferent and efferent. And afferent means that he brings information to the brain, efferent that brings motor orders to the muscles, and the fascia being the fascia, the connective tissue specialized in being ligaments, tendons, and having all the pockets in which we have the organs and we have the muscles. So starting putting things together, and we can say, okay, basically larynx is into the respiratory system and it is one ingredient, even if there are two because they are quite different in their behavior. We have the digestive system, and the pharynx for us is specific, and also the pharynx with the esophagus has some specifics that the other part of the digestive system with the smooth muscle don't have, because I recap a little, into the esophagus and especially into the pharynx we have skeletal muscles, but not of the voluntary type. And then we have the skeletal muscles, and some of you I know will tell me, yeah, but it has not so much to do with voice production. It has a lot to do with voice production, and not only from the diaphragm point of view. Some of you, as I said, we know abdominals, we know thoracic, meaning intercostal muscles that can be inhalatory and expiratory, and it depends on the layer. The most internal are expiratory, the external are inhalatory, and then we have some other muscles more specific and more superficial than those, but deeper into the skeletal muscles that have something to do with respiration too. Then we have the cranial nerves. They give the orders directly, so we just tell to the larynx or to the pharynx, move, open, do your job. And the fascia, if you have worked with an osteopath, you know that the fascia has a central place, especially because if the fascia is not developed in a favorable way, it will inhibit movements, actions, range of motions, and muscles work. And since we have fascia everywhere in the body, directly you say, okay, it can inhibit the work into the larynx. Yeah, but not only. So, putting the things together, what it means? It means that we can understand what those specific systems do usually, not for singing, usually. because this will interfere on two levels into our singing. First, because if you use a structure in a certain way, we will have a response of this structure to this use. Again, we are an environment, we are a dynamic structure. What I found that usually is out of the discussion in voice is that we don't take into account, or we take into account but in a little reductionist way, what we do and the effect of what we do, not only directly, that is quite well studied, but especially in the contra-reaction that we are going to have. And this from a muscular point of view, because when we do an action, we never take into account, or I don't find into the discussion on vocal technique taken into account enough. I have to say Michal Trimble puts this into account, or probably some others that I don't know, my bad. But in the conferences, in the articles, in the books I read, I study, I don't find it. I found Michal Trimble, so if you have noticed information about some, please put in the comments. I will be very happy to make them more renowned into that, because it's important. I think it's very important, it's central, because we are getting more specific into, from a medical point of view, from a training point of view in sports, from a rehab point of view, we are getting to put bridges from one system to the other, from one practice that has developed a specific capacity of working into the system from its perspective, because we can make a synthesis of this into the context of some other purposes, functions, activations of our system. Before we make a little reduction, but it was interesting because it was getting to separate things into the body, into the mind, into the neurons. And now with the knowledge we have acquired, we can do as I'm doing, but it's just an opening of discussion. As I always say, it's not, I don't have the ambition to be correct in what I'm saying, but I have the ambition of being useful. And useful can be into the direction or what will be more correct than what I'm telling and what I'm analyzing. It's just a little provocation to open the discussion, and also for me it's a common practice, a daily practice, with the results that some say being quite remarkable and not usual, of a certain kind. Yeah, and they are not usual, of a certain kind, by this kind of thought and bridging specific knowledges that tended to be too much separated from my point of view and from the point of view of the evolution and development of knowledge. So when we say the respiratory system, it does what? Usually and mostly it breathes. It makes our respiration for life. When we work out, when you have fear, when we have anxiety, when we sleep, when we have a trauma, when, I don't know, we are at the office or in our job work. All those things have an effect on the breathing patterns, on the breathing muscles, on the fascia of the breathing muscles, on the pharynx, as we saw when I did talk about the pharynx, because the pattern of breath will have as a factor that there is mouth breathing. It is more likely that you are going to have an obstruction during the sleep. So just we have your mouth breather. What effect is it going to have on your pharynx and muscles? Is this going to affect your breathing patterns? Is this going to affect your peripharyngeal muscles into their action, or those peripharyngeal muscles are not yet so well trained by what? For example, by your daily job, in which you are not activating the neck muscles. Some neck muscles are peripharyngeal muscles, so you don't activate, you are pretty sedentary. Then during the night you are not activating, and you're going to have more likely to have some obstruction when you're going to sing. The peripharyngeal muscles have a say into your opening of the pharynx. Your mouth breathing have a say into your singing. How much is the ratio of this? This we are going to see more deeply in some episodes specific. But the ratio of those interferences are very important for singing. I am specialized into solving things mostly because I've seen that it's quite applicable, useful, easy to do, and it creates a discontinuity in all the system by the skeletal muscle work into the segment of those. But coming back to the neck, if you see the model, we have the segment of the neck that wants to be stable. Perhaps it's not clear like that with the light seems to be okay. So we want the neck stable. When the neck is not stable, it is mobilized by what? First, into the neck itself, the muscles are not doing their appropriate work, or they are too stiff or not strong enough and weak, and they are quite weak. So they can't appropriately maintain this segment of the cervical spine stable. In the neck, this model doesn't take into account that we have the respiratory system and the larynx that, as singers know, and if you're not a singer you don't know, but you will know if you try, the larynx wants to be mobile. When you see in stroboscopy the vocal folds, there are many, it is said in many articles now that when we have a bad idea of the work of the vocal folds, because it looks by stroboscopy and by the way of looking at them as if they were horizontal. And as Rubin told us 3 years ago in Copenhagen in a lecture, no, exactly as I knew, and I said to the students, but it's nice when it is a huge personality as Rubin, that vocal folds move into a more, how can I say, diagonal movement. They move vertically. Okay, so the vocal folds, they vibrate, but they don't stay horizontal. They can stay in different angles of these. And the larynx, as we know, wants to come up and get down in a certain ratio. So how can we put those things together? That if the neck is stable in a correct way, meaning it is functional, we probably have the correct environment to have the larynx mobile enough for phonation. Because when the segment and the functionality is not respected, what this model from Gray Cook tells us, and it's well researched and well accepted as reliable, it tells us that, as we know, into the segment we are going to look to compensate for the function we lack, meaning the stability. And normally we are going to use muscles that usually permit the movement of the larynx, and this is going to stiffen the larynx. But not only. The movement, the mobilized cervical segment is going to try to find its stabilization into the adjacent segment. In this case, the thoracic segment. The thoracic segment wants to be mobile. And if the neck is mobile or is mobilized, it will tend to stabilize the thoracic segment. The thoracic segment stabilized will be fixed, and will fix what? Will fix an important part of our breath. I know that in singing we usually look a little reductionist, thinking, okay, the breath is there to give the pressure. For the pressure I need a flow. I do with some muscles, can be abdominals, can be others. We are correct and we are enough. Not exactly. Not exactly. We can have a flow, and there's certain kind of styles that have more flow than other kinds of styles, and we still have enough of subglottal pressure for singing. The subglottis is the point, is horizontal or in diagonal it's the point of closure of the vocal folds. And for phonation we must have more pressure under the vocal folds, the glottis, that above. So more pressure under. And we can create this pressure in many ways. We will see in breath management. Today I will make an example. If the thoracic segment is fixed, we have not many ways of doing that. And I will show you a couple of things. Those couple of things are, first, you usually see into this, my app. First example, those muscles that you see here, they are not all, but are a part of what is called hypaxial muscles, and then we have epaxial. It is here, yeah, exactly. Hypaxial and epaxial. Those muscles, why I'm citing them for singing? If you see, we have the abdominals, we have the diaphragm, we have the limbs muscles. They are the muscles that are in front of a certain axis, and this axis being the spine. As you see, we have two, they're not exactly in front. So why are in this model that I make you there? Because they are hypaxial. They are hypaxial, they are part of the hypaxial fascia, that is the layer of the connective tissue with the pockets with inside those muscles. And from a nervous point of view, we have a column along the spine for hypaxial muscles, and we have a column for the muscle in the spine, another column for the epaxial. The epaxial, as you see, being those I couldn't find the suboccipital muscles that must be added to this model, but I couldn't find into this app, but I will write so you will find them. As you see, those are paraspinal muscles. I put one kind on one side and one kind on the other. We have both on both sides, but it was to simplify the vision. That you have to think that those are for two on both sides, so we can see which one are. So those muscles, they have in common the fascia, and they have in common the column of the nervous system, meaning that they have a correlation. From the fascial point of view, when you have a fascia in common, the form of this fascia will determine if those muscles can work properly or not. And if you see, for hypaxial, we have muscles that we know are directly impacting breathing. Those in the back, you will not think that impact breathing. You really? Some of you could say, But when I see Miley Cyrus singing now, how? She used to sing quite straight, but coming forward quite often. Then she changed because she's evolving. And in her evolution, she's using, in my view, exactly those two muscles in the back, which are the serratus, posterior, inferior and superior. It's a specific adaptation of what? Of how she uses the skeletal muscles and the breath management to obtain some specific into her voice. In my analysis, she's doing that, so she put more chest into the voice without hyper-utilization of the larynx muscles, because the hyper-utilization of the larynx muscles to obtain chest voice will damage the vocal folds to have the kind of drive that she puts into the voice and to have the kind of extension she sings into. And what we have seen into training practices is that if we displace the strength that we are going to use for the system, we can displace the effort. Meaning that if you use the strength of those muscles and the forced expiratory muscles at the same time with all the strength and the constrictive capacity of the larynx muscles to maintain the vocal folds closed, it will exceed the capacity of the fragile tissue surrounding the vocal folds and probably also of the ligaments and of the muscles of the vocal folds to remain not undamaged by this strength that arrives from other parts of the body. If you see the other parts of the body just for a geometric thing, they're bigger. So they can transmit more strength. They can produce more strength. And what you see is that you will have less clarity of words, less clarity of nuances into the single words, because you are delegating the capacity of movement a bit more to a farther segment into the body, so that you can leave more relaxed the larynx part of the system, so not to be overwhelmed by the strength that we are using. What I've done now, it's exactly in the sense of putting the ingredients together. What I put into account, how the skeletal muscle system works in biomechanics. If she uses those, she can't come forward because it's totally another kind of breath management. It follows the same logic of biomechanics. Simply, it is what is usually said as posture, but posture is not specific. Here I'm talking very specific. And those muscles activate the expiratory and the forced expiratory force, and every time we activate some muscles, we activate at a certain point the antagonist, that is the diaphragm in this case, and all the other muscles, they are into the same system in the different chains, because we can't think the system as an isolated system, even if we would like a lot to have that. But even if you don't want, some activation into your foot is going to arrive into your voice. What it is important is the ratio of that, utility of this, the ratio of this, and if you want to have this movement into your foot being important into your voice production or not. But it will have an effect, and especially when we will see more in details, because I will go deeper on those specific one-on-one for the segments. If some are always important and some not too much, what are the logic into there? Why I'm going to do the next one on the functions? Because for our system we have some priorities. Priorities for our body are the basic ones: reproduction and survival and feeding. Those are biological priorities. From the survival point of view, I'm making examples. What is it more important? The inhalatory gesture or the expiratory one? Well, quite clearly, the inspiration, the inhalatory one. And this has a big impact on us, because we are wired not to be able not to have an inhalation. We are not able to decide not to have an inhalation. We can decide to try not to, but it's impossible. And there are sad cases of people who want to try and attempt suicide. They can't just stop breathing, because the system at a certain point will breathe, even if absolutely don't want. For singing, we said we want more pressure under the vocal folds than above the vocal folds. So we are doing what? We are reversing biological priority. Probably you have never seen it that way. When we reverse some biological priorities, we have two problems. First, we are wired not to reverse them for survival mechanism. So we can understand, I imagine, that we are going to get into conflict with the survival system if something looks not exactly so clear and so safe. Everything we don't know looks not safe at first. So since singing is something we learn and we acquire, very often we have some fear associated. At this fear associated, we have two ways of manage them. We have something that was the polyvagal theory. I'm not very fond of it, even if I think that it has been really central to put the attention into something very important. It is the vagus nerve in voice production, and the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system into voice production, because they are at the center of voice production. But when you have fear, you have the active action of the sympathetic system. The sympathetic system will have some effects into your nervous system, into digestive system, metabolically, etc. It will give you anxiety, it will give you adrenaline, it will speed up your heart rate. And for the polyvagal theory and for some schools of thought, the thing is, okay, we create conditions in which we don't have the activation of the sympathetic system. The problem I have with that is that singing is wants energy, wants drive, wants rhythm, wants movement, wants imagination, wants all you think it is energetic presence. So it wants and it will determine some activation of the sympathetic system. Just even to have, if you see recent studies, well, you have an inflammatory response by exercises. You have a sympathetic response from exercises because it's a stress. You have a sympathetic response from singing because it's a stress. If you relax, you're not going to exercise. You're not going to sing some kind of music. You don't have access to some movements, to some energies, to some, how can I say, a wide array of artistic expressions. And what polyvagal theory doesn't take into account is something that is basic for us singing. It is that when we activate the parasympathetic system that has afferent possibilities, meaning of action, we activate what? We have parasympathetic system in the sacral part. We put a page because it's quite important to realize how things are connected and how we can leverage the systems at our advantage. The studies I put for the cranial nerves on the vagus stimulation are showing that the activation and the stimulation, electric stimulation of the vagus nerve has all those kind of interesting effects in all the system, anti-inflammatory, on the heart rate, immunomodulatory, on the immune system, modulatory, of the immune system, on the mood, on depression. But if you remember from the cranial nerves, the vagus nerve, is it only afferent for the parasympathetic system? No. It is afferent for the larynx and for the pharynx. Wow. So we have the possibility that we know of changing the biological hierarchy of the breath and getting an advantage from that. Because yes, you get fair when you want to sing, because you're choosing not to put in hierarchy the survival, meaning the inhalatory first. You will not have the pressure. But what you're doing when you put these other purpose into hierarchy, you're activating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system, and this is going to affect the access of anxiety of the sympathetic system. And as we say, before singing you are fair, but if you actually go to sing even with the fear usually goes away and you start singing very well. So it is important that those ingredients are important when you don't know how to activate it, when you're a beginner, when you have not a good voice, or when you have not a functional voice. Yep. And for that we have practices to do what? To activate the parasympathetic system, even not by the vagus nerve, but making the thing easier to get into the activation direct of the vagus nerve. A second reason for which is tricky for the vagus nerve. If you remember, for the cranial nerves, we said, okay, the vagus nerve is a mixed nerve. It has afferent action and afferent action. The afferent action being the function of bringing to the brain important information about the state of the organs. Which organs? The heart, the lungs, the digestive organs, anterior part of the colon. When we want to start singing and we start a technique, usually we get to do some breath exercises, or by singing we, as we said, invert the priority of the system, making more important and the winner, the exhale into the inhale. This is usually going to change how and where you are stretching your lungs tissue. I'm telling that, you say, okay, but I'm breathing, so it's not a great problem. You have the vagus nerve that will tell your brain, take care. Where usually you're very stretched, now you're not stretching anymore. Pam, 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 danger. Danger. And you have to breathe, meaning you have to put the air in. And so you stop making the winner, the exhale. It happens all the time. Yeah. So what we have to do, since we are starting putting the ingredients, we say, okay, are we really in danger if we are not stretching as usual that part of the lungs? And usually if you are doing correct singing, breath management, it has a sense what we are doing. No, we are not in danger. Because as we know, even if we want to sing, when really the system is going to have a problem of oxygenation into the body, no matter how much you want to sing, is going to sing, to breathe in. And usually your face skin is changing color when it happens that. And it happens not immediately, it happens after a certain time. Longer than the time you are able to sing or to exhale. Why I'm telling that? Because we come back to the vagus. The vagus has afferent and afferent. They are not in the same ratio. The afferent, meaning the information, takes the 80% of the function. The afferent takes the 20%. So the afferent, in this case, is going to be a disturbances into our thinking and our clarity of intent to activate the afferent. And very often this disturbance is so huge that you can't activate your larynx muscles. If you see some episodes of Huberman Lab, it makes quite clear the case that when we are into those kind of danger perception, it is the insula that wants to respond with a fight or flight response, that is the sympathetic response. What we said before, previously, we want a parasympathetic activation that will take care of this overwhelming of the system, of the sympathetic response, without taking away the energy of the sympathetic response, because it's the energy into the system. We want to balance parasympathetic and sympathetic. That is what we want. Not by taking away the stressor, that is the activity you want to do. As Toni Morrison says, that the tension is life. You can't take away the tension. If you take away the tension, you're in a coma. Yeah, the great writer, Toni Morrison. Yeah, she has more than one point. To do that, we come back to Huberman. What we do, and we have understood that we have to learn to do, because it's not biologically, we are not biologically wired to do that. We have to put another kind of thought and come away from the system that is creating the problem, meaning the situation that is creating the problem, and to activate another kind of rules that will make the dialogue into the insula and the prefrontal cortex again possible, so that we come back from a fight or flight response to a strategic and powerful capacity of strategize, and we come back into control. And this will relax the system. It will take away the overwhelming fight or flight response. How we do that in singing? We have many ways. One can be, for example, where do we have some other parasympathetic activation that has something to do with singing. For example, if you see this article, you will see that we have sympathetic activation, and it has to do with the gluteus maximus, with the thighs, with the legs, with the posterior part of the legs and the pelvic segment. That has to do with diaphragm activation because they work in parallel, as the osteopath says. So, if you activate voluntarily those parts, we will have a parasympathetic activation. This parasympathetic activation will take away a bit of the burden of the system and will be more able to activate into the larynx. So we managed to have strategies to put another rule, another purpose, another movement into the same situation from one other part working into the voice production to overcome a stuck point. I want to make second example of today. Yeah, today it will be a little longer Christmas gift. Look at this photo and look at this video. This video I will put just a second, slightly less than a second. Stop my video and get to see the link. It's the first link you find into the description, and then come back. Did you really have the idea that the heart touches the diaphragm and that the diaphragm has an action on the output and the flow of blood of the heart? Not really. When we exhale and inhale, according to the length of inhaling and exhaling, we are changing the ratio of the input of the flow of the heart. And by that we can manipulate many things in an effect direct, even if it looks indirect. Because the muscles of the heart are skeletal muscles, but they are not voluntarily controlled. Doesn't mean that they are not controlled. And when we put the ingredients, we get to the system of control we want. If it's not directly on the muscles, yeah, we are not getting to put nerves there. It would be silly. We are getting into our system, how it works, for our purposes. That's what we are doing. That is what we are doing here. And it's what traditional practices have always done with the voice. Not with the kind of knowledge we have today, but still they've done. We get more refined. So, when we exhale, we augment the output of the flow of the blood from the heart. If the exhale lasts longer than the inhale, the brain is going to get back into homeostasis. Is going to tell the brain is going to tell the heart to slow down, having so a calming effect. If the inhale is longer than the exhale, the inflow into the heart is going to augment, and the ratio of the output is going to be smaller than the ratio of the in, and the brain is going to say to the system to augment the heart rate, to augment the output flow. What do we do when we sing? As we said, we make winner the exhale, and we exhale usually longer than how much we inhale. So we are doing what again? Well, we were panicking. My God, I'm really panicking. Yeah. You do what? You make your exhale longer. And again, we said we can use the parasympathetic activation of the hips, and we can use the exhale longer. When we said that inhalation is a priority, it means that if we have chronic stress or we are sedentary, we will see very often as a postural problem or as a functional problem of the breath, or how you want to call it, that the inhalatory is preferred on the exhalatory. because it's the first we want to have and is the one that is always active, even when we are sedentary and we are not correctly activating the muscles, because it's the preferred. So we will have something that very often when you start singing or when you are a singer you don't think it is a thing, of an excess of the inhalatory position toward the exhalatory. When you see the Michal Trimble, that is the Belcanto breath management, what it is? It is how to manage the diaphragm that can come down but not till the end of the range of motion, meaning not being prioritized on the expiratory muscles. And we do this how? We do this by putting attention into the expiratory muscles, that when you put attention there before breathing, you are making stiffer the structure, and at the same time you are correcting the excess of inhalatory positions. If you usually have too much of the inhalatory position, sometimes it will be impossible for your system to activate this tension into the expiratory muscles. And because they are, when you stay all the time into the end of the range of motion, you lose the contractile capacity of the opposed function, and it's where the system becomes dysfunctional. And there we have some other strategies. Some strategies, for example, are inhalatory. We said it's the preferred and is the prioritized. Usually when we are into the end of range of motion of the diaphragm, you will find the structure that you use into the body for defensive purposes being activated into the muscles all the time. And if those block the system of the exhalatory muscles, because again it's prioritized, so the exhalatory are never a priority. To see which are those muscles, that is the specific of my research, permits to say, okay, I put a movement into those muscles that is the opposed movement of the defensive fight or flight response, so that we are going to unstuck the system. And again, when we put the opposite of the movement into the defensive reaction of the system, we'll have an activation into the brain saying, are you sure that it's safe? But since we know that it is safe because we are doing by knowledge and not by into a true danger situation, we are going to do what? We are going to activate the breath, mostly expiratory. We are going to activate some other systems that will help the parasympathetic activation. If you see my exercise on YouTube, by breathing out and stepping on, it's not running but nearly stepping on quite fast. What is the logic? I'm activating what? The hypaxial muscles, that, as you've seen, they are respiratory muscles, and the diaphragm is one into those. So I'm creating the condition not to be stuck, because I'm actively activating something that will unstuck the system just by its movement. And doing what? Prioritizing exhale. So I will at the same time calm the system.
Try that, it's very useful and very good.
You start seeing a little bit. So to come back, I want to do a little analysis on Trimble breath, Cetric's breath, and the abdominal breath. What are the systems into how we are putting things? For Trimble is for classical music, so it differs from set-rigs because it asks what? To put a lot of air into the back. Into the back is where the diaphragm has its most muscular part. It has more strength. And doing that in Trimble, it works on the reaction of the diaphragm into this breath management, so that you tense the expiratory muscles. While they're tensed, you force breathing into. It will not an excess of breath because the structure will not be able to expand too much. So you will not be able to put so much air inside to be overinflating the fragile and delicate tissues of the lungs. And at the same time, you're doing what? You're charging your expiratory and your diaphragm of contraction, so that the diaphragm will be as a spring, and you will have a legato and a strength, while the diaphragm will be able to maintain its contraction without being too much flattened, because too much flattened will have a bad repercussion into voice production, because being too much flattened is the diaphragm is winning on the exhaling muscles. And since all our system is wired to prefer the diaphragm, one way of not making it the winner is to make impossible for it to go too much flattened. And this is what Cetrix does. But it doesn't put the jack into the abdominals. Why? Because it works with classical singers, pop singers, jazz singers, musical theatre singers, rock singers. And the difference is that they don't want exactly a classical voice, so they don't want to lean with the, how can I say, lowest larynx possible and with the most connected voice possible, and they want a more active expiratory muscles, because into the Trimble breath management, that is the Belcanto, the expiratory are present, but the system is, they are so much into pressure, into tension, that they can't move as if there were the fingers into the piano. And mostly there will be the larynx muscles and the diaphragm itself. When you do, as we said, for example, for Miley Cyrus, the example we made when we started, she's using some muscles that in Trimble are not preferential. And we don't want to have too much activation there. How do we do that? By having more elasticity and flexibility, meaning more range of motion of the expiratory muscles. But still to manage in a similar way the diaphragm, he does what, Cetrix? It asks for the sternum not to come down, and it will be enough not to have a too flattened diaphragm. For rock purposes, we can use or some classical specific kind of specialization that we have had, especially in the 20th century, with Puccini and more varied sound. We delegate this part not to the thoracic segment, but we want to get more abdominal. This presents a risk of a too flattened diaphragm. But if we manage well, we can use the abdominal part of the expiratory force without losing the specific of the diaphragm, and this in my concept is, for example, by taking away some work of the defensive system, by closing the waistline, for example. So, controlling that it is not overwhelming the other segments of the body capacity forces for the expiratory force, so that we maintain the expiratory dominance into the system, and not flattening too much the diaphragm, because flattening too much the diaphragm, it will have two effects. First, that you will not have the correct subglottal pressure, that is a problem, because it creates directly a problem. Second, the diaphragm that can't come back while being contracted, that is the eccentric work, will not remain trained and will lose strength. So we will have to make some training specific to maintain the strength and the position and the correct range of motion and the correct ratio of opposing forces and functions into the system. Have a nice Christmas.